and a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined the Digital Transformation Summit today. Again, just being very honored to be part of this esteemed panel, and welcome to our panel members as well, Mr. Raed, Mr. Abdullah, and Mr. Aditya. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really look forward to a very interesting and insightful discussion on the topic. As Anisha rightly mentioned, we're looking at the idea of how COVID-19 has actually impacted the digital transformation agenda in general, as well as the entire economic scenario within the Middle East, as well as in Oman. So let me start by looking at some of the questions that we had sort of discussed earlier. We are looking at areas around how we can reimagine the approaches to opening up the economy, in the post-pandemic era. So my first question, which I would like to sort of address to Mr. Abdullah, is how do you see the role of digital technologies, in reopening of the Middle Eastern economies, especially after what we call as a peak of the pandemic era, which was in 2020. Would definitely like to hear your points.
Thank you, Sanjeev. It's my pleasure being here with you and with the distinguished delegates and panelists. It's such an important topic, and we are almost 2 years after the pandemic, which I think has been big booster for IT initiatives and a big drive for digital transformation. I think from economic perspective, we are not just seeing acceleration and introduction to new trends of using technology and remote work and mobile applications. We are also seeing a shift in the behavior and the way that people discovered how to interact with shops and to purchase services. Right now, we are seeing a new concept in Saudi Arabia, which is called cloud restaurants. That wasn't there before the pandemic. But since that we have seen how the lockdown really put all or most of the people in houses, and how they had to live with that, and how businesses interacted and reacted to this by offering and making it easy for them to just do their normal shopping and normal activities using smartphone apps, and the booming and the exponential growth in transactions and use of delivery applications and food delivery applications and groceries. Now we are seeing cloud restaurants, and maybe in the future we will see also cloud groceries. We will probably see other cloud retail shops. The idea of this cloud restaurants is that, and it has been already regulated by the municipals of the different cities. So you would, as a business owner, you would open a restaurant that doesn't have a front-end entry. You would meet the required regulations and whatever that is needed from hygiene perspective and from permits, and get the required staff, etc. And you will just operate as you would operate if it was open for public. The difference is the only people who would come in are the delivery guy. Delivery guy would come, would pick up the order, and then they will move on to deliver their order. We have also seen some other restaurants and other shops converting from front-facing to back office, and just closing their front opening office and just working on the background, and they have seen it even more profitable. They don't spend a lot of time, and they don't need a lot of space to provide for the customers to come in, and at the same time they have a stream of orders and demand that they could also make forecasts for it the next day or the next week or the next month. So I think, in summary, the shift and the new norm is not just about the technology and how we are all embraced technology and adopted the use of remote work and the use of smartphone application, but also the shift of the mindset and how the people really tried something new, and many of them they like it, and how businesses also tried a new model and they have found it even profitable. And it is natural. When people change, businesses will react to it. And I think the next reaction and the next change will be more of back office shops and back office retailers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abdullah. I think it's a very encouraging idea to see that technology is actually reshaping quite a few sectors within the Saudi economy as well. I think I quite second the very thought of why digital technologies should be at the forefront of all the transformation and all the change that is now associated after the COVID-19 pandemic. As you can see, digitally, we are now looking at a hyper speed, a hyper scale up of everything we do from an operational perspective or from something which is on the ground converted to a digital twin or something which is now becoming a very, very cloud-based model for interaction between customers, partners, and enterprises themselves. So I see this is a very, very strong congruence from a digital perspective that will actually really flourish, the entire industry segment going forward. Thank you so much. Let me try to now take another view. So again, let me try to bring in Mr. Raid. Mr. Raid, we are now trying to understand, according to you, what would be the three most important factors that you think are now responsible towards successful digital transformation now in the post-pandemic era?
Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Sanjeev, for the question. And thank you very much for inviting me for this event. And it's a pleasure to be part of it. Right. So if we touch upon the three factors, whether it's, in my opinion, whether it's during the pandemic, after the pandemic, or before the pandemic, obviously the pandemic itself has pushed digital transformation agendas in all sectors. But to me, the most three important factors would possibly be the right leadership, leadership that takes you through that journey and walks the talk when you talk about, a successful cultural transformation in building agility within the organization, making sure that the voice of customer, empathizing with the customer, prototyping and failing quick. I would say that, this is one major factor. Possibly the other major factor would be to necessarily maximize on the investment value. And board of directors always and management would like to see, that whatever money gets spent, a value is returned out of it, and that value is maximized as much as possible. Now, that value could be revenue, could be customer experience and stickiness, or could be a reduction on a particular cost in adopting a new technology, for example, or a new process straight through and more on. The third, I would say that, is building resilience within the design phases and plan phases, rather than looking at it as a retrospective element where you have designed everything, you have taken care of everything that needs to be taken care of, trying to go live, and then somebody else, not the builders, if I may call it, looks at the resilience of the products or services, digital products or services that you're trying to launch. So I would say, I would sum it up between these three main factors.
Thank you so much, Raid. Maybe I would like to also hear Mr. Abdullah's views on the same subject. Three important factors for the success of DT going forward.
It is a big question, and everyone is now trying to jump into digital transformation. And I think from the different projects and the different people that I have talked to in the industry, and the CEOs that are trying to, adopt the digital transformation, and most of the people thinking that, okay, we have brought the technology, we have brought the latest in the market that serves ERP or automation or stuff like that. I think it varies from one industry to another. It's different if it is government or it is business. and it is different if the organization is big or small, and it is different if the organization is has a history of using technology or not. But in general, looking at all the factors and thinking about all industries and different sizes of different ages, I think there are three main elements that has to be considered. One is the culture and the mindset of the people, because digital transformation is more about people and processes and utilization. It is not all about technology. If you bring the latest technology, the latest automation, and you expect that it would transform how your business is going, this is not going to happen. First thing is, it has to be a culture-driven initiative. Everyone has to buy in into changing their way of operation, or their way of dealing with business, or their way of dealing with customers and getting their feedback. And it also requires a high caliber talent, people who are willing and able to make change and able to adapt to new challenges and coming up with new ideas. So the culture has changed, the way of doing business has changed, the way of interacting with customers and getting their feedback has to change, and technology will support that. So technology will be at the back end of supporting all of this change of mindset and change of attitude toward doing business as usual. Combining it, this is the first factor, combining it with the second most important factor, which is the buy-in from the top leadership. And it has to start from the top, the CEO, and maybe also from the board. It is not enough to just bring the IT department and say, okay, let's start the digital transformation, kick off the initiative, let everyone engaged, and let's do this. No, it has to come from everyone on the top and then cascaded. And this has to be coupled with the buy-in, the understanding of everyone why this is important. It is not threatening your job. It is more about transforming and making technology useful for you, so you can focus on other things, other important things, not just the operational matters. So this is the second factor I think is very important, and we miss it sometimes because top management are thinking, okay, this is technology, it has to be driven mainly by IT, but no, it has to come from CIO and then cascaded down. I think the third part comes to technology, having a blueprint and having a business architecture that can highlight which areas are most mature and ready to adapt with the transformation and to apply the technologies, whether it is RPA or artificial intelligence or machine learning. There has to be a visibility on the organization level in terms of what capabilities are there, what are the components and the units that are most ready, what are the components that are most significant for going and starting with the rollout. And of course, this again has to be supported by a good management of technology and IT products and services.
Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. I think we are now sort of segueing into the next segment of our discussion. And as you can imagine, innovation has been fueled greatly by the pandemic. But along with innovation, we have also discovered agility. And the whole idea of being agile and innovative at the same time now tries to bring a new sea change within the IT department as such. Now, just looking at how we are trying to spur up innovation within our own departments, either in terms of reorganizing or restructuring, or how we are revolutionizing the entire IT function as such. Let me try to bring Mr. Aditya into the discussion now. So the question for you, Mr. Aditya, is how do you think innovation was fueled in your organizations during and after the peak of the pandemic?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to this discussion. I think there's been quite a lot of interesting inputs given by the two other panelists. For our organization, I mean, we are primarily in the oil and gas construction sector, both downstream and upstream, and we do a lot of work on primarily sites. During let's say prior to the pandemic, we had actually embarked on a transformation project, which I would say in a way was sort of coupled with contingency as pandemic hit, because I think the priority shifted from innovation to connectivity and reliability and remote working and allowing people to continue to do their work without having any disruption to access to the key applications. But once we went past the sort of contingency phase, I think one of the benefits that has happened is that our innovation track has continued. There have been things such as realizing that now movement of people and resources can actually cause a considerable amount of impact of cost to the business. So there's been an uptake on virtual reality, on some other IoT-based technology that we have been implementing, which has got spurred quite actively after the pandemic, and realizing that I wouldn't say dependency on human resources have reduced, but I would say now the business is looking at quite seriously engaging or embedding technology as well as a sort of enablement to the actual manual effort, which is something that was sort of parked because the traditional industry that we are, there was never a drive for bringing so much technology into the environment. But I think the focus on now rapidly bringing operational technology and modernizing workshops, modernizing our sites, our safety procedures, our ability to communicate to workers at any point in time, during even post-pandemic, keeping track of them. We are still working with people in bubbles, continuing to maintain that bubbles so that productivity is not lost. And that has become the norm. I mean, our business model has proactively not changed. I know Abdullah was mentioning about the cloud kitchens, but I think that's been a more, certain sectors have evolved their complete business model in the process post-pandemic. And they have kind of realized that there are avenues of business that were never explored before. But for us, we've gone to the core business again of construction and maintenance and upgrade works in the oil and gas sector. But at the same time, now there is a greater awareness of welfare of employees, keeping track of their health and safety, making sure that one person's health can affect the rest of the team. So these are some of the new shifts that have been achieved in the management mindset, and that's sort of then spurring on into what can technology do to fill this gap? I mean, what can you bring in to make the people more safer, more intuitive? A simple example of, checking temperature at the time of entering the office seems a simple pause, check, and go. But when you do it for 800 workers who get off the buses, you can imagine the lost productivity time. So how do you, improve that measurement of temperature and automate the process rather than physically checking? And how do you stop and quarantine people quickly? So I think there's been a shift in the way we work, and I think technology has really helped to garner that support, that there are multiple areas that were unexplored before that have actually now become quite actively imbibed by the business.
Thank you, Mr. Aditya. In fact, trying to now look at the banking and financial services sector, and we have Raed, who of course represents that sector, which has already been going through a lot of churn as well as change. So, Mr. Raed, in your opinion, how do you see the pandemic fueled in the innovation within your enterprise, for example?
Right. Thanks for the question, Sanjeev. I'm going to tackle this question a little bit more generically than just our organization. So I would say, the BFSI sector within, I would say, the country To be honest, initially it got affected. I feel it got affected. The innovation got affected massively, and that is because I think mainly, I mean, in my discussions with my colleagues in other banks and other financial entities, most of the innovation was depending on face-to-face, and it was used to the face-to-face kind of collaboration and finding solutions and solving problem statements with technology, if I may say. But there were some organizations that were quite resilient, and the innovation, I would say, stopped for a period of time when the pandemic hit hard. But then those resilient organizations within the BFSI sector, as being the resilient, they reacted quite fast. And I would say the cultural transformation of such innovation, if I may call it even functions, has quickly adopted to the new norm. Some organizations within the BFSI has till date, I would say, has failed into learning how to adopt to this new norm. So it varies, I would say, within even Oman itself, within the BFSI industry. I think it varies company to company. But if we take it a little bit more generically, moving away not only into the BFSI sector, some industries it was so clear that yes, they were extraordinarily resilient, and the innovation almost didn't stop, maybe for a day or two, since establishing internet connections at home, although majority of them had them already. But in any case, maybe a day or two downtimes of being really working on innovation projects and innovation problem solving. But so, for example, the medical and the health sector, I think, did a massive work in innovating how they in solving the problems of the current patients that couldn't be resolved during the pandemic, other than if you're a COVID-19 patient. Even I would say, as an example that Abdullah has given, for example, the retail, the restaurants, the kitchens, as Aditya was calling it. There was in my opinion, there was a massive innovation actually boomed. The innovation boomed during that period. I mean, whether you call it a innovation or transformation, it is, somewhat interchangeably. It's not really interchangeably, but somewhat interchangeably. So some sectors, started adopting wearables, IoT, just like what Aditya was saying, to actually scan 800, yes, it is a nightmare, but scanning a 4,000, for example, staff going to a physical location, even if the physical location is now taking 50% of the people, but it's still 4,000, capitalizing on IoT, capitalizing on wearables to detect people's locations and so on is something that a lot of retailers and other sectors have massively adopted during the pandemic, and they are continuously innovating on that. Now, what I would like to also mention is, I would say, not necessarily post the pandemic, because we're not seriously post the pandemic, but we are at a very, very, very good situation as of now, at least in Oman. Obviously, Saudi Arabia has lifted even the mask requirements, so good job, Saudi Arabia. We are working towards that. Our numbers are far, far, far better now. But I would say the BFSI sector is now, the leadership within the BFSI sector is now looking at becoming at least more resilient in the innovation area. Maybe obviously resilient in the operational area. This is not a brainer for a BFSI sector, but looking at it from an innovation point of view, leadership is now putting a lot of emphasis on capitalizing on the learnings of the pandemic to be able to continuously innovate and become obviously more resilient within the innovation area.
I think that's a very interesting perspective, Mr. Raed. I think in order to sort of also look at the follow through of I would say the peak of the pandemic and how it actually changed a lot of consumer behaviors, we see that within the technology functions themselves, I think we had to bring in a lot of agility. And the agility was not always driven by the in-house ideas. It was pretty much driven by the business trying to ask us to do things very, very fast, whether we want to have a customer portal, whether we want to have a partner, ecosystem developed, or whether we're looking at innovation pretty much happening, in a hybrid environment, without having really necessarily co-located teams. I think that the technology and the digital, I would say, diaspora within Oman as well as within Middle East actually rose up to the occasion and actually sort of commended back to the business what they were really looking for in a very, very short span. So it was a very, very commendable idea. In fact, let me also get Aditya's views on the fact, how do you see the agility from the IT function, that you must have discovered during, or I would say now at the fag end of the peak of the pandemic, if I call it so.
Okay, so I mean, what has happened during the pandemic is obviously the timeline of delivery was shortened for almost everything that was required by the business at that point in time, whether it was enabling people to work from home, whether it was providing connectivity or finding solutions to track certain operations and logistics. So there has been a significant shift in the way the business was expecting IT to perform. They wanted things happening much faster, which I would say is a momentum IT would like to keep because you don't want to lose that interest from the business's end, because it's all sort of whether we could always deliver things faster. It was just the appetite of the business and their ability to accept the risk or to make that investment that used to take time in getting investment approvals and just them penning it down to say that yes, you can go ahead with this project. I think what has also happened is there have been some substantial outputs that have been delivered, clearly because the technology is already there to deliver those outputs for the business, and the business outcomes have happened rapidly. So I would say there's been a level of credibility that has been increased. The level of deliverables has become much faster, and it's no longer about making a very prolonged systemic change. It's more about taking areas of the various businesses and modernizing as you go along. And I think that shift is something that is quite desirable for IT as a function. I mean, I would call myself an impatient IT guy. So for me, this is fantastic because it saves a lot of breath and effort in trying to convince people every time something needs to be implemented. And I think what Rayed said is that it's the business that's coming to us more than we are going to the business. And I think that sort of churn that people have realized that they could change so much during the pandemic, now they want to continue changing more. And I think that sort of momentum has sort of spurred this agile approach quite actively for most of the technology streams. I mean, the core layers have always been the fastest to achieve, whether it's cloud migrations or collaborations and things like that. But I think what's really benefited here is that people are now in the business exploring other areas that they can change, and that's sort of a benefit that's come out of this phase.
I think indeed the whole idea of how the CIO's agenda is now sort of merging closely with the CEO's agenda in terms of organizational growth, I think has been quite exemplary. In the words of Uncle Ben and how he sort of quoted to Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, he said, "With great power comes great responsibility." So I think we now have that advent of where technology is now sort of taking strides in terms of achieving business goals as well as helping the organizational growth agenda as well as the innovation in general. Let me try to now move on to another area which I would say was deeply impacted because of the pandemic. We were looking at supply chains, we're looking at logistics and how consumers were sort of affected by this. In terms of your digital transformation areas, do you see that there was a very strong advent of a digital supply chain that was brought about? And maybe I'll start with Rayed to sort of explain his idea about this concept.
Right. So if we're talking about, we're talking about the supply of a lot of things that IT departments and the transformation itself was needing during the pandemic, and to be honest, also post-pandemic. As we all know, there is an issue in China in producing microchips. So that has affected and will continuously, seems like it'll affect a lot of industries, and especially the BFSI. The BFSI, for example, all our debit cards, credit cards, ATMs, CDMs, you name it, right? You name it, it uses a microservice. And there seems to be a problem with production in that. So that obviously, and that is due to COVID-19. So that has affected the supply and the manufacturing of a major component when it comes to providing, such possibility of providing such technologies. Whatever you do digitally runs on an embedded machine or an operating system, on a machine. So those has affected massively. Now, if you look at other areas, as Abdullah was saying, for example, the purchasing online has massively increased due to the pandemic. And when you were requesting products from, for example, me requesting products from Oman, there were no major issues in delivering them and the logistics around them. Although during the high pitch of the pandemic, even the logistics companies within the country wasn't able to operate because they were not allowed to operate. So that has also affected, but that was a very minute duration during the pandemic. But the major thing that I was personally even affected on is, delivering of products that are coming internationally. Even if they arrive extraordinarily late. So all what I'm saying is that I would imagine that that has affected every industry, almost every industry, and maybe the most radical effect was probably on the health sector. I mean, I was speaking to a few friends who are in the health sector, and they were saying that the vaccines themselves arriving to some countries was a chaos, and it was taking a much longer time than anticipated. And then a lot of things happened due to the Delta, and so all of that was affected by the COVID-19, and the logistics definitely got affected.
In fact, just adding on to the same thought, one of the statistics that was brought out, in early 2021 was about the change in the consumer behavior, as well as the change in the number of consumers who decided to suddenly start shopping online. And then they said the estimates that were drawn towards consumers becoming online over the next 10 years. And those estimates were actually achieved in a span of 90 days. So you can imagine the burst in the number of consumers who went online, started ordering products, and then trying to manage the entire digital supply chain as well as the logistical execution of such a huge purchase and distribution chain, I think was significantly a big challenge. And I think some of the digital technologies that were brought in, especially that were brought in from the logistic players as well as from the other partner ecosystems, including banks, including insurance companies, including the supply chain software giants, I think they definitely helped us to sort of shore up some of those big peaks, in disruptive behavior, if I may say so. Let us also look at one of the other aspects of the pandemic, which was basically looking at a hybrid workplace. That was one of the other elements that was brought out very, very strongly. We had people looking at a constant state of flux, and again, we had issues around retention and employee engagement. So let me actually start by asking Mr. Abdullah again as to what are the comments on whether hybrid workplaces are here to stay or they will be just a phenomenon during the pandemic. How do you see this?
Well, I think the pandemic has opened new ideas and new trends in terms of hiring and the workplace. And as Ra'id and Gupta was saying, we're saying that innovation and new ideas were forced. People, they just out of need came up with new models and new ideas, and has driven their innovation to address something that they are currently facing a problem with. I think one of the things that I have tried and I have seen it very successful is, even before the pandemic, is hiring people offshore. and hiring people on certain kind of projects, subject matter experts that are needed for one project or the other. And then, once the project is done, they will move to other project with other companies. I think similarly, we have seen this with the pandemic. We have started to see that it's not just only about the project, but we can also hire people who can work online. They don't have to be on site. They don't have to be full time, but they can be with us throughout the whole time, not just for one project or two, and it would work. And I think we haven't thought about this before, especially in the GCC, because we used to have everyone on board. We used to have everyone on site. And once we were forced to implement remote work and manage our activities and our projects online, and we have seen that it's really working, I think it will be something useful to continue to use. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see in the future, especially in the GCC, new jobs that we call it online jobs only, and new jobs for people who are overseas. And that will massively save companies and businesses a lot of money, because they don't have to go through the visas and the expenses of travel and the expenses of having more office space. I think it is very useful, although it is, I remember a chart that I have seen, it is applicable for some kind of jobs, especially jobs that are clear and has certain objectives and has clear outcomes. But if we talk about jobs that need interactions, like project management or change management, or that requires so many interactions and meetings with people, I think it will be difficult to just continue to do it online. We still need human interaction and engagement and having all the people on one table. But definitely having remote work and remote meetings will continue. It has saved many people their time and their effort and commuting. And it has even, when we used to meet with different government agencies, it was so difficult to agree on one time, and everyone will go to that one building from 5 or 6 different organizations. Now it is a matter of just clicking on Teams and everyone will be on board. It has become more easy for bringing people even from different organizations together and finishing things even faster.
Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. I think we are now almost towards the end of our panel time. May I just request our panelists to start looking at a 1-minute summary of their ideas, and I'll try to throw in a topic just for our reference. I'm looking at employee engagement versus talent acquisition. Which would be a more critical area for you? And if you can just sum up your ideas in a minute's time, please. Thank you.
All right, I'll go first. So I think staff requisition and acquiring the right resource, the right caliber, will continuously be a challenge. I don't know if Abdullah in Saudi Arabia that is being faced, and others in Dubai and UAE in general, but in Oman it is quite difficult. It's quite difficult to find the right resources, the right time when you need them at the right price. And I think that will continue to be a challenge throughout. But if you look at it in terms of being able to uptake new young resources and to be able to motivate them and continuously keep them motivated and on their toes, if I may call it, that this is basically what they're looking for. Majority of youngsters, they'd like to be on their toes. They'd like to be doing something on an ongoing basis. They don't like to stop thinking and doing stuff. So I'll just go back to the topic of the, just quickly on the workplace, stay or not staying. My ex-employer was Microsoft, and anyone there could tell you that, Microsoft, I doubt Microsoft I wasn't part of Microsoft during the pandemic, but I doubt Microsoft even felt the difference. Maybe the innovation part at product level, maybe, but this is something that we were used to. So again, going back to that, this will also enable you to acquire the right resources and keep them for a longer period of time, because you're adopting new technologies, you're adopting new concepts of working. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raid. So, Mr. Aditya, may I have your views on talent acquisition versus talent management or employee engagement? How do you see the roles?
I mean, as Raid said, I think the acquisition is still a challenge. It's quite a challenge for our sector as well in oil and gas. But I think engagement, I would still say that I think with the change of how people are collaborating, that has rapidly increased. Not to say that engagement is something that can be done with. It's pretty much an ongoing activity that needs to, that has many aspects to it from an HR and a productivity perspective. But I think acquisition still continues to be quite a challenge for us, because getting the resources, I mean, we had earlier challenges of just getting the resources into the country to work. Now, in our sector, it's very difficult. A majority of our sector doesn't allow for remote working because, like I said, it's project delivery. So the people have to be on board. And also there is, because of the shift in the way people are working, I think the opportunities have also expanded, which is good for the individual, challenging for the company, because it's opened up doors, as Abdullah was saying, for remote working for people even across beyond boundaries of where they are today. So I think, though, I mean, one will have to see where this churn gets everybody and how it pans out, because there is a shift in people going back to the office and getting back to the daily routine. So acquisition definitely is going to continue to be a challenge, and getting the right skill set is going to be a challenge. Engagement, I feel, is something that just has sort of increased much more with the collaboration tools that we have in the world today. And I think that can just be even made better as time passes.
Wonderful. May I have Mr. Abdullah's views on this matter as
well? I think we have got really good inputs from Raid and Aditya. I would, if I had to choose between the two, they are both important. But if I had to choose, I would say talent acquisition is first, because it will lead to higher engagement, because I think higher engagement and people engagement is more related to culture and how people do their jobs. So if we start by acquiring the right talent and put investments on them, and we retain them for a period of time, eventually everyone will be more engaged. Everyone will have more better environment and more productive environment, and eventually that will lead to higher engagement. So both are important, but I would say talent acquisition should go first.
Very good. Thank you so much again, gentlemen. I think it's been a privilege being part of the panel. And as I would like to summarize from my end, we always realize that success has many parents, but failure is always an orphan. So I think on similar lines, it's all about how technology and technology teams today are sort of in a position where they can actually garner so much success and have a lot of parentage, or in case they fail, then they'll have nobody but themselves to blame. But I think this has been the course of the pandemic, and I think technology is now really, really poised to take off in a much, much faster fashion. I'll hand it back to Anisha, and thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been a privilege to be part of the panel again. Thanks again.
Thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us. Sanjeev, we do have one question that is coming for Mr. Abdullah. So we have Al-Muntasir asking, do you believe that user acceptance for technology, or let's say the ability to access this platform, is a huge support itself for these platforms?
I always believe that having cutting edge technologies or having sophisticated system or service that is not accepted by the user and the business would not deliver the value. So definitely customer engagement, customer acceptance, and having them understand why they need this service or this product is definitely a success factor, a major success factor for any technology initiative or any change, whether it is automation or new products or new services. So yes, engagement in general is very important from the beginning until user acceptance and having business understand really how this will bring value to them.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today for discussing such an important issue of how we had a trigger coming in from COVID, but we've really pulled up our socks and delivered when it comes to bringing in digital transformation. Thank you to all of you for joining us, and thank you, Sanjeev, for steering this discussion. Lots of talking points and a lot of value adds for all those attending this conference. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.